Somebody give me a thumbs up. Great,
Yes.
lovely. This Paul starts off talking about the message of the cross. And I suppose as we get closer and closer to Good Friday and Easter, and we're in the depths of Lent at the moment, the message of the cross, I suppose, could be taken as a summary of all that Christianity is about. Many churches used to have processions, didn't they, on Good Friday, following the cross around, and it was a part of the Easter celebrations. The message of the cross. And the cross becomes a symbol of Christianity, of all the things that could have become a symbol of Christianity. One early symbol, for example, was a fish, because it was representative as a mnemonic about the main part of the Christian message. And there are other things, but the message, the cross becomes the main symbol of Christianity over the years. So much so now that it's become almost either an item of jewelry, or it's just become some kind of religious symbol. But of course, it wasn't originally a religious symbol. It was just a way of killing people. It was the Roman way of crucifixion, of torture, and all the rest of it. And so the message of the cross is the message about the death of Jesus. And Paul has some quite strong things to say about it. So, for example, 5 times in this passage, he describes it as being foolishness. Foolishness, or it can be equally described there, things like nonsense, how absurd, silliness, madness, illogical. It just doesn't make sense. And I must admit, for many people in our society, in the world around us, our neighbors and friends and colleagues, etc., the message of Christianity seems to be nonsense. It seems to be illogical. It doesn't seem to make sense, because many people view Christianity with huge suspicion nowadays. I came across a survey which has just been done by the Bible Society, and asking a huge representative sample, 20,000 people, about their views of the Bible. And the most two commonly held views about the Bible was that it was out of date and contradictory. Out of date and contradictory. They were the two most common views that people have of the Bible. Now, if they have that view of the Bible, then that obviously gives them the same view of basically Christianity and Christians, because Bible is sort of our book. We say we believe it, but if it's out of date, it's got nothing to do with me nowadays. What's it possibly got to do with life now? And if it's contradictory, it seems, well, it doesn't make sense, really, does it? It's a bit nonsense. It's madness. It's folly to believe it. Then if you start talking about, Jesus dying, well, what's that got to do with me now? I don't understand. And therefore, understandably now, for many people, the Christian message is foolishness, just as it was for many people when Paul wrote to the Corinthians. And he gives a couple of examples. The first example he gives of the Jews, and they have 2 problems specifically with the message of the cross. One is that this idea of Christ crucified was a stumbling block. It caused them to fall at the first hurdle. It caused them to trip over. Because Christ and crucified were 2 words which for them didn't go together. It was like having a married bachelor. It was like having a square circle. They don't go together. What do you mean, a Christ and crucified? Now, for us, Christ just means Jesus. It's his surname for us. But in those days, Christ, as we all know, was the reference to the Messiah, the chosen one of God, which the Jews themselves believed in. They believed in the Christ. That wasn't the issue. They believed in the Christ, but the Christ they believed in was going to be a leader, was going to do great things for them, was going to deliver and rescue the Jews, was going to bring everybody from all over the world to Jerusalem to worship the Jewish God. It was going to be fantastic when the Christ appears. So the suggestion of Christ being crucified And of course, crucifixion here is a reference to the death by the Romans. And the Romans were the ones who had occupied the country about 50 years ago at the time when this was written. They'd occupied the country. They'd completely ruled it by force. They were occupiers, and many people hated them. The idea that Christ would be crucified, i.e. killed by the Romans, whoa, stop there. Don't go bother any further. No, it's a stumbling block. It causes them to fall at the first hurdle. And secondly, the Jews traditionally wanted, what it says there, Paul, they want signs. And signs here is some kind of perhaps miracle, some kind of proof that if the Messiah was who he said he was, he would produce signs. And if you remember, one of Jesus' temptations in the wilderness that we remember at Lent, the 40 days of Lent, was Jesus to do those kind of things. He was going to tempt it to jump off a tall building and land safely. Not any tall building, of course, but it was the temple, the center of the Jewish religion. And he was going to jump off the high temple and float down to the ground. Now, whatever better could you have than that? Brilliant. Right to the heart of the Jewish faith, Jesus would do some spectacular miracle and everybody would come to believe in him. But as we know, do not put the Lord your God to the test, says Jesus. So Jesus avoided the spectacular. Yes, he did do miracles, but he tends to heal somebody and then tell people, oh, don't tell anybody, will you? Don't tell anybody. Keep it quiet. And he avoids it. When Jesus does a miracle in front of lots of people, like feeding the 5,000, he disappears straight afterwards. Because he avoided the spectacular, because he knew it was going to be a dead end. It was a cul-de-sac. People would just go down wanting more and more. They were in it for the sideshow. And that's not what he was about. So the message about Jesus to the Jews seemed to be a no-go, and Paul identifies those two reasons: the idea of Christ being crucified and the Jews wanting something that Jesus wasn't able to give them. So that was the Jews. The other people that Paul mentions, the example two, are the Greeks, because Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, a part of the Greek empire there. And Greeks, of course, the emphasis, they want wisdom. The emphasis there is on speech and argument, on rationality and making logical sense, on philosophy. And they were good at it. We all know famous Greek philosophers and stuff like that. They seek wisdom. And often, as I said there, the emphasis was on the beauty and not on the content. It was all on style and not on substance. As long as it looked good and it felt good, yeah, well, I can understand that. And of course, Jesus was a bit of a letdown on that, because he didn't conform to the expectations of what they saw of wisdom. Now, in answer to this, Paul tries to say that actually Jesus met both their demands, both their expectations, but in different ways. So he actually says to the Greeks that Jesus, to the Romans, to the Jews rather, sorry, that Jesus is the power of God. You demanded signs. Well, actually, Jesus is the power of God. If you did but know. What kind of power? Not just to do spectacular miracles to impress everybody, but Jesus is able to change people's lives, is able to do something different in you and me, to give us hope when there is no hope. He changes water into wine, the ordinary into the extraordinary. Jesus is the power of God. And he says to the Corinthians, the church there in the same chapter, many of you, he says, aren't very important from a human point of view. Not many of you are wise. Not many of you are rich. Not many of you are influential. But look what Jesus has done in your life and wants to do in your life. So Jesus is the power of God. And to the Greeks, actually, they didn't realize it, but Jesus is the wisdom of God. They were all into wisdom. But of course, Jesus is the wisdom of God, because it's God's wisdom, which is not our wisdom. As the prophet Isaiah in the Old Testament said, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. And so Jesus answered their particular needs, i.e. for wisdom and power, but in a way they didn't realize. So we have the resources we need in Jesus. Now, that's what Paul was saying back in the day, back in the church in Corinth. So obviously the question is, what about the message of the cross today? In what ways is the Christian message foolishness, folly, illogical, absurd, nonsense? Well, clearly for many people today, it is. Because increasingly we have to face up to the fact that the size of people, the number of people who say they believe it, is shrinking. I see we've got this census coming up, haven't we? In a couple of weeks' time, I think we all have to fill in the census online. That'll be interesting. But and one of the things the census will tell us is how many people say they believe, how many people identify with a particular religion or say they believe in God. I haven't actually looked at the questions, so I'm not quite sure what the precise questions are, but certainly the census will ask those kind of questions. And it's obviously the largest census we do every 10 years. And in the meantime, they have all kinds of much smaller ones, smaller surveys and questionnaires and surveys. And all the ones that have done indicate that fewer and fewer people are either going to church, and fewer people say that they believe in God or would identify themselves as Christians and follow the message of Jesus. And obviously, the older you are, you will tend to be more Christian and more believing, and the younger you are, the less you will be. Now, it's fairly obvious in a way, but it'll be interesting to see what the results come out. So clearly, for many people today, the Christian message is foolishness. So I was wondering, who are the Jews and the Greeks of today? Who are the people who would say, look at Christianity, look at us, look at me, look at you, and say, well, no, I don't really want to go, thank you, to church. I don't really want to believe, because. And I wonder what people would say to that. So I'm going to stop sharing. Sorry, you've got to look at me now. And I wonder, has anyone got any suggestions? Because I'd like to have a little bit of a comeback, a bit of feedback. I don't believe in preaching, 6 feet above contradiction. You're not allowed to say anything.